Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth. Now before we continue, you need to be familiar with the opening scene of Macbeth. You could read it in the original early modern English that Shakespeare wrote it in, and I highly recommend this. Or you could listen to it as an audiobook. You could even watch it, either a theatre version of it or a film adaptation. Or perhaps you've already studied it in class with your teacher and you're using this video as a revision tool. Either way, you need to be familiar with Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth before you continue. So in this video, I will summarise the plot of the opening scene. We will then identify key characters, themes and contextual knowledge worth knowing. I'll also highlight some key quotes and techniques that I would recommend memorising for your exam. And I'll leave you with a couple of tasks you can complete after the video to really solidify your knowledge. So, what is going on in Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth? Well, three witches meet in Scotland during a storm. Some translations of the text say they meet in a battlefield, some say in a moor, some say on a heath. What you need to know is they're basically meeting in the wilderness in the countryside of Scotland. And they're talking to one another, and they're speaking strangely. By that I mean they're speaking with rhyme and metre, and I'll go into a bit more detail about that later. But their discussion centres around agreeing to meet again after the battle. The word they use for battle is hurly-burly, which means like chaos. And after the battle, they all agree that they're going to meet and interact with Macbeth. Why Macbeth? The witches give no reason, but clearly they're going to interfere and meddle with his life. And just as soon as they appear, the witches magically disappear with their familiars. A familiar is an animal companion or servant that someone magical like a witch might have. And in the opening scene we have Grey Malkin, who is a cat, and Paddock, who is a toad. So some key takeaways from Act 1, Scene 1. The witches are clearly supernatural, and this is shown by the fact they arrive in a storm. The text actually says thunder and lightning. The witches are also confirmed as being supernatural through how they speak. They speak in rhyme. They also speak in metre. That means their speech has a distinct pattern or rhythm, and we can identify this as tetrameter. At moments, the witches speak individually, but sometimes they also speak all together in unison as a choir. Again, that's not a normal thing to do, and that clearly indicates their supernatural status. And at the very end of the scene, the witches leave us with a paradox. A paradox is when a situation doesn't make logical sense, usually because some ideas contradict themselves. And the witches achieve this paradox through an oxymoron. Finally, their supernatural status is firmly established by their ability to communicate with their animal familiars. So, obviously, the key characters in Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth are the three witches. Sometimes in the play they're referred to as the Weird Sisters. They're definitely meant to be supernatural, as evidenced by the fact they arrive in a storm, in thunder and lightning. They speak in a strange way with rhyme and rhythm, and that they can communicate with animals called familiars. So in the Jacobean era, when this play would have been performed, the Jacobean era was from 1603 to 1625, all the actors were male. So you would have had three male actors playing the three witches. Maybe they would have dressed up as women. Maybe they would have had special makeup to make them look extra ugly. Maybe they would have even kept their beards, and the audience might have found that funny that these female witches were having beards. What you also need to know is that the play would have been performed in the Globe Theatre, and in the Globe Theatre there is a trap door underneath the stage, and the witches may have emerged from under the stage through the trap door. And what that would have signified to the audience is that they were coming from hell. So hell is below the earth, and by emerging through the trapdoor in the middle of all this thunder and lightning, it would have been a clear indication to the audience that these witches are supernatural and that they're probably evil. And all of this adds up to really shock the audience, whether it's the fact that these male actors are dressed in a certain way or speaking in a certain way, or the fact that they emerge through the trapdoor, or the fact that they emerge in a storm, which would have been created by actors backstage, perhaps banging pots and pans together or banging a drum. All of this grand entrance would have been designed to shock the audience, and then Shakespeare uses it to really hook them into his play Macbeth. So what key themes do we encounter in the opening scene? Well, Shakespeare clearly introduces us to the supernatural. He does this through the three witches, through how they appear, through how they speak. He does this with the storm that they appear in, and as I previously mentioned, it would have had to be created by actors backstage, and Shakespeare solidifies this idea of the supernatural with these animal familiars, Grey Malkin and Paddock. Another theme Shakespeare introduces in the opening scene is this idea of destiny, or some people might call it fate. Macbeth was just an ordinary Scottish man getting on with his life, but these witches, these supernatural creatures, have chosen him for some reason, and they're going to interfere in his life. So what contextual knowledge, what historical knowledge do you need to really understand the opening scene of Macbeth? In the Jacobean era, just as a reminder, that's 1603 to 1625, the audience would have believed that witches were real and evil. They would have believed that they were servants of the devil. Whereas a modern audience, we might not believe that witches exist or have any real power in the world. Back in the Jacobean era, the audience would have genuinely believed witches exist and could influence their life in a negative way. Actually, back then in the Jacobean era, if you practiced witchcraft or you supported a witch in any way, this crime was punishable by death. So they took this supernatural influence very seriously. And King James I, who was the monarch when Macbeth was first performed, he hated witches. Let me give you a couple of key dates. King James I took the English throne in 1603, and he ruled until his death in 1625. And Macbeth was first performed in 1606. Actually, King James I hated witches so much, he even wrote a book called Demonology, about how to identify witches and sharing knowledge and trying to educate society about the dangers of the supernatural. So, key quotes you want to remember from Act 1, Scene 1. You might want to remember the stage direction, thunder and lightning, and this will clearly link to the theme of the supernatural. If you want further evidence of Shakespeare using the supernatural, you might want to remember the names of the familiars, Grey Malkin and Paddock. But in my opinion, the most important quote from Act 1, Scene 1 to remember is "Fair is foul and foul is fair." There's a few things going on here. First of all is the alliteration of the F sound in fair and foul. Actually, this is the first line of a rhyming couplet. Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. So the alliteration even continues in the F sound in fog and filthy. And what you might want to note is that Shakespeare often uses a rhyming couplet, that's when two lines rhyme, to end off a scene. It's a really clear indication to the actors and the audience that this scene has come to an end. And here we have the rhyming of the words fair and air. But not only is this line alliteration, it's also an oxymoron. Oxymoron is when we have two opposite words or contradicting ideas placed closely together in a sentence. And here the contradiction comes in fair and foul. Fair, to put it simply, means good, and foul, to put it in simple terms, means bad. It might help you to think about football and a football player making a tackle. If the referee judges that the tackle is fair, it means it's a good tackle. The football player's won the ball, there's no problems. However, if the referee judges the tackle is a foul, it means it's a bad tackle. They've missed the ball, they've hurt the player. It's not acceptable. So if you want to translate this quote, fair is foul and foul is fair, You could translate it to good is bad and bad is good, which clearly doesn't make sense. How can good also be bad at the same time, and how can bad be good at the same time? It's paradoxical, it clashes, it doesn't make any sense. And I think Shakespeare uses this oxymoron to create a sense of confusion. This doesn't make sense, and the audience wants to figure out, how does goodness and badness, fairness and foulness play out in the rest of Macbeth? And will this confusing phrase get solved later on in the play? So I think Shakespeare uses that to really engage the audience. So, what can you do to solidify your learning of the opening scene of Macbeth? I would make notes from this video on a physical copy of the play, get out some highlighters, some pens, and make some notes and annotate. You can then move on to answer this question. How does Shakespeare engage the audience in Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth? To answer this, I would write a couple of analytical paragraphs. I know different teachers use different acronyms, maybe P or Peel or Petal or PQTE. I don't mind what you use. It might be a good idea to talk about how Shakespeare engages the audience through the use of the thunder and lightning stage direction. You may want to talk about how Shakespeare engages the audience through making the witches seem supernatural through their speech, through the rhythm and the rhyme. Or you may want to go for that oxymoron and alliteration of fair is foul and foul is fair, and how this confusing paradox intrigues the audience and makes them want to figure out how it unfolds in the play. If you really are an outstanding student, you may include more than one quote, and if you're really showing off your knowledge, you may add a little bit of contextual knowledge in there about how King James I maybe believed in witches, that he wrote a book called Demonology, or how the Jacobean audience watching the play would have reacted to the witches and believed that they were real and genuine. In my opinion, that would be the icing on the cake, having a bit of contextual knowledge in there. Okay, well, if you found this video useful to your understanding of Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth, please give it a like. Please also subscribe to the Mr. Hardy YouTube channel. I'll be making videos for the rest of the scenes in Shakespeare's Macbeth. And please leave a comment if you think I've left out a key quote or a key piece of contextual knowledge or any other information you want to share with the teachers and students who are using this video to help them learn. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will see you on the next one.